Live from Fairfax, it's the Inside Scoop, Virginia. All the news Virginians want to know. Here's your host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia Politics. My name is Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host tonight. And tonight we've got a big show with lots of guests. We're going to talk about what's going on at the General Assembly, because tomorrow is crossover. And we'll ask our first guest if he'll tell us exactly what crossover is for those of you who don't know what it is, because our first guest is Senator Ralph Northam. He is the senator from the 6th Senate District of Virginia, and we are bringing him in from Skype. I think this may be his maiden voyage for Skype, so we'll see how that all goes. But Senator Northam, I want to thank you for coming and joining us today to give us an update of what is going on down in the General Assembly.
Thank you so much, Bettina, for having me. And just so you know, for the record, I Skype with my daughter at UVA, so this is not my maiden voyage, but hopefully it will go well.
All right, well, great. Why don't you tell us just very briefly what crossover is for those people who don't know what it is?
That's great. For the first couple of weeks, the Senate will introduce their bills on the Senate side, and the House will introduce their bills on the House side, and those that pass out of each House will go over to the other end of the Capitol, down the hall. And so my bills that have been passed, the Senate will now be heard by the committees and the delegates on the House end and vice versa. And after that, then they'll go to the governor.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, since you're a senator, I've got to ask you first up, because it's gotten a lot of press. What happened with this Senate redistricting plan that apparently was sprung on the Democrats? Is that still alive? Where does that stand?
That's a great question. You know, the Constitution says that we redraw the lines every 10 years, with the year ending in 1. So we thought we were finished with redistricting in 2011. And lo and behold, last Monday, the Republicans came up with this plan that at the end of the day, 45 to 40% of the population will have a new senator if that plan goes through. So, that redistricting plan is now in front of the House. We're hoping that the Speaker finds the plan non-germane, which means that it had nothing to do with the original bill. If they pass out of the House, then the governor would sign it. We've actually collected, Bettina, over 14,000 signatures telling the governor not to sign this piece of legislation. I'm going to deliver those to him tomorrow. If he does sign it and it gets through, then we're going to end up in court. And we feel confident at the end of the day that the Supreme Court will agree with us and find that their plan is totally unconstitutional.
Wow. More gamesmanship, I think, by the Republicans. This time in the Senate, we're used to seeing it in the House of Delegates. We're just not used to seeing it in the Senate, so that's unfortunate. But let's talk some substance. To bring people up to date, there's been a lot of articles in the paper up here about the governor's transportation bill. Where does that stand?
Right. Well, the House passed a transportation plan. It's now being discussed in the Senate. There are a lot of problems with it, Bettina. I would, give the governor credit for putting a plan on the table, but it's not what's right for Virginia, and so there's a lot of work to be done. First of all, it takes money from the general fund, and the general fund is used for education, healthcare, and first responders. So, we're not pleased with that. It also does away with the gas tax that's already in existence. It's a sustainable source of revenue. That's a non-starter on the Senate side. And then finally, believe it or not, it penalizes people for using alternative energy vehicles. I mean, we're trying to move away from fossil fuel, and this transportation plan that the governor put on the table penalizes people for doing that. So a lot of problems with it. We're massaging that bill in the Senate right now, and hopefully we can get something out of here that will be likable for us, that will be good for the Commonwealth. Then it's going to, the House will have to decide whether they can agree on some of what we're doing.
What do you think the chances are for all of that happening? Because there does seem to be a good bit of objections to a lot of the various pieces of this transportation bill. Do you think anything is going to get done this year?
We're hopeful that it will, but there is no question. I mean, transportation is the #1 priority right now for the Commonwealth. We have just put it off year after year, and it's time that we do something serious about transportation and infrastructure. So hopefully at the end of the day, we can all work something out and come up with a plan that's in the best interest of the Commonwealth.
Well, let's give it a hope. Let me ask you about Medicaid expansion. You're a doctor, so you're the great person to ask about Medicaid expansion. What's that all about? Are we going to do it? I had read that Virginia wasn't going to do it, that the governor didn't want to do it, people weren't going to do it. What's it all about?
Great question, and I am a physician, and I feel very strongly that we should expand Medicaid, and I'll just briefly try to go through some of the points with you so your viewers can appreciate what we're doing. But what has happened, Bettina, over the last years is that the cost of health care has grown a lot faster than people's salaries. So there are a lot of hardworking people out there right now who cannot afford health care and can't afford insurance. And so as part of the Affordable Care Act, President Obama put in there that we would expand from 100% to 133% the poverty limit, and that will open up coverage to around 250 to 350,000 Virginians. And it is so important for the quality of their health care, for access to a provider, and finally, it's really the only way we can address costs, because in order to address costs, people have to have coverage, and so it's something that's going to be paid for by the federal government for the first 3 years, and then it will be phased into 90% government funded over the next few years. So it's kind of a no-brainer, excuse the pun, but a no-brainer for Virginia not to accept this. And so we're doing a lot of work, Bettina. Senator Favola and I have worked on a budget amendment that will expand Medicaid. There's also going to be some Medicaid reform as part of that package, and so we're moving forward with that, and actually it's starting to gain a little traction. So again, it's the best thing for the Commonwealth, and hopefully we can make that happen.
Well, and it's not as if the people who don't have health insurance right now aren't costing other Virginians to pay for their health care in any event. I mean, I'm paying for it through increased premiums on my health insurance, the people, the hospitals, through the care they have to give when these folks show up in the emergency room. So it's not as if we aren't already paying it. And as you said, the federal government's going to pay it for the first 3 years.
That's right. That's a great point, Bettina. And people that don't have coverage, when they get sick, they end up in the emergency room. And what an inefficient way that is to provide health care. And like you said, folks that have insurance, the reason that their premiums are so high is that they're covering for those that don't. So there's no excuse for us not doing this. The hospitals will be much better off, providers will be much better off, and at the end of the day, the folks across Virginia will now have access to a provider, and that's key for their good health.
Well, let me ask you something else about the Affordable Care Act. And there was some conversation about this back in November, December timeframe about health care exchanges, and was Virginia going to have its own, or were we going to sign up for the federal one? And I've lost track of that. What are we doing with respect to setting up this exchange where some people could actually get health insurance?
Right, thank you, and that's a great question too. And what a great opportunity, Bettina, for the state to take control of some of the healthcare issues. I mean, this is what you hear people preaching about. They want less federal government involvement. So here it is. They put it on the table, and last year we spent a significant amount of time coming up with a healthcare exchange that would be good for Virginia. We put it in a box, put a nice ribbon on it. It's all ready to be opened up and used, and lo and behold, our governor has said, no, we're going to go ahead and deny that and use the federal plan. So, it's a bit hypocritical when you get right down to it, Bettina. We've got the package ready to go that will be in the best interest of Virginia, and he's not allowing us to use it.
Now, that is kind of inexplicable. Let's ask you something else now, because my favorite topic, I've done a bunch of shows on this. Last year there was a lot of press given in the national press and in the local press about our voter identification laws. Many people considered them to be attempts to suppress the vote in certain minority communities and other communities that traditionally vote Democratic. And I don't know, there were a bunch of bills this year. There were some bills in, and I think they've all failed, about expanding early voting. I think maybe the one for older people has gotten through some parts of it, but I'm not sure where any of the rest stands.
Right. I can try to help you with that, and that's a great point. I think, it's fair to say, Bettina, that democracy works best when people have a voice. And as you know, people up there in Northern Virginia and in my area, the state in Hampton Roads, they had to wait in line 3, 4, 5 hours to vote. That's just not good democracy. So the Democrats this year brought numerous bills to include no excuse, early voting, another law that would allow those that are 65 years and older to not have to give an excuse. There have been numerous bills, and as you said, all of them have been defeated. And now what we're dealing with are the Republican bills that are essentially designed to make it more difficult to vote. Not easier, but more difficult. For example, everybody now, they're trying to say should have a photo ID. Well, that sounds nice, but logistically, that's a real problem for a lot of people. So we're doing everything we can to fight back on those bills. But, as we've said in the past, Bettina, we need to change some of these seats up here and again, listen to the people across the Commonwealth and let them participate in democracy.
Well, and I do wonder when they talk about photo ID, because certainly in Northern Virginia, everybody drives. Of course, everybody drives in the rural parts of the state. They may just not have driver's licenses, as I recall. But you have to get one. You need a copy of your birth certificate. You need all of these proofs. Does anybody have a budget plan in the last minute or so that we have that tells us how we're going to pay for it if we put in these more restrictive requirements?
Excellent question, Bettina. No, they don't. And, we have told them that Governor McDonald just spent, I think, about $2 million last year, trying to inform people of the changes. And there is no problem with the current system. There is no proof that there's voter fraud out there. Yet they want to make it more difficult to vote, and they're going to cost the Commonwealth of Virginia a significant amount more money re-educating folks. So altogether, it's just a bad plan.
Well, we are almost out of time, Senator Northam. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and update us on what's going out in the General Assembly. So thank you so much, Senator Northam, and we'll have you back on when we need some more updates.
Thank you so much. It's great seeing you again, Bettina.
All right, thanks. So we are going to be back shortly with Margi Vanderhye for our second segment. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfripp at AOL.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is fundamental.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host for Inside Scoop, Virginia Politics, and we are doing a General Assembly update. And this segment, we have with us Margi Vanderhye. She is one of the founders of the Women's Strike Force. We've had Women's Strike Force folks on in the past. We're really pleased to have Margi on today. And she is a former delegate from the House of Delegates in Virginia, the 34th District, I believe is what it was. And we're going to talk about women's health, women's reproductive rights, and some other issues that those things sometimes get camouflaged with. So Margi, I want to thank you for coming onto the show.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I got the notice that said you all were going to have, the Strike Force was going to have a reception early in January when the General Assembly went on. But the Republicans reportedly were not going to get into all these divisive social issues this year. No need for the women to get all upset. So did anybody show up? Was it a good event, or how did it all go?
We had people coming out the door at the event, and it was a very rainy night. There were competing social events and receptions at the Hill, at Capitol Hill in Richmond, and yet throngs of people showed up. And the best part was it was multi-generational and multi-gender. We had men and women, and we had young women to grandmothers to great-grandmothers who were there, who were very concerned about women's health care, access to health care, and access to their own decisions. And I think that's what turned people out. To see a crowd like that in Richmond on a winter night in response to the legislation from last year was really gratifying. And I think part of it too was that given the chance to repeal some of the bad legislation that they had done last year, there seemed to be little inclination to do so. So the Women's Strike Force participants wanted to make sure that people knew that we'd remembered.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there were young women out there, because I've always sort of felt that the young women didn't fully understand the peril that their rights were in, because they're so used to having them that they didn't really ever think that somebody could try and take them away. So I'm glad to hear that it isn't just the older women and sort of the middle-aged women who remember when you couldn't get contraceptions, you couldn't have legal abortions, that the younger women are finally sort of keying into the fact that they need to be involved in this. That's a good sign.
I had someone tell me, a senior citizen tell me, I can't believe we have to fight these battles again. And I have a granddaughter who said, why do we have to fight these battles again? So, and there's everyone in between. And I think the purpose of the Women's Strike Force, and certainly the gratifying part that it's bipartisan, is that we want to make sure people don't have to fight these battles again. So we are forming a coalition of people to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear.
Well, isn't this your big year? I mean, we had all these horrible things in the House of Delegates last year with the infamous Dave Albo. He didn't get sex from his wife because of the transvaginal ultrasound thing. So you had all of this stuff going on last year in the House of Delegates, and every single person in the House of Delegates is up for election this year. So is this the Women's Strike Force big year? You've got to make your impact this year.
This is the year that we're going to certainly be looking at candidates who will run against the people who voted enthusiastically for this legislation, and then given the chance to repeal it or to say, no, I really had a second thought about that, in fact, reaffirm the decisions that they made last year. They just don't want anyone to remember it. They'd rather change the conversation and talk about other things. The Women's Strike Force is raising money, and we'll have a large event in Northern Virginia on March 21st, and we'll be sending out information about that to invite people to be a part of the conversation, to be a part of turning the House of Delegates to candidates and to support candidates who are much more sympathetic to to our point of view, that will not, in fact, vote for ultrasound legislation, that will not, in fact, vote for the targeted abortion clinic regulation that's been signed, that don't believe that personhood is viable legislation, and that think that women should be able to make their own health care decisions with regard to contraception and other health care matters. So that's the agenda.
Well, let me ask you about some of that, because were there any new troublesome bills? I'm going to go back to talk about some of the, I know there were some efforts to repeal some of what happened last year. Was there anything new sitting out there that they managed to quash before anybody started paying a lot of attention to it? Because it seems pretty quiet this year.
There are some bills that probably will not make it out of committee. Those were introduced by Delegate Bob Marshall because he cannot help himself. There has to be certainly legislation, and he introduced several bills to restrict women's access to contraception. Those bills have not been heard in committee, and you likely will not hear from them. One bill that did get out of committee that required that no Medicaid funds be used if an indigent woman needed to terminate a pregnancy with a non-viable fetus. That proved a bridge too far for some of the people in the legislature, and even though some of the more ardent members of the House voted in favor of it, it was killed by the Senate, and that did not see the light of day. That one was pretty shocking. I think it crossed the line for too many people, and so that was another one. But the other ones were simply to roll back the terrible legislation that was passed last year, and all those attempts to roll it back failed so far.
And have they actually made it out of committee? Because my understanding of how some of these things work is they would come up in committee and then it would get killed there so that the people don't have to take a public position. Because the committee votes are not recorded in the sense of it's not on television someplace.
It's not in television, but yes, those votes were killed at the Health and Education Committee in the House and the Senate. I mean, excuse me, in the Senate, okay. So that they never got a chance to be voted on by the full body.
Now, do they come over in crossover? In our first segment, Senator Ralph Northam was explaining the crossover concept. Were there bills passed in the House of Delegates, like the personhood bill that Delegate Marshall introduced again this year? Did it get killed, or is it going to end up going over to the Senate where it's got to get killed again?
Personhood will not be going over there. Some of the other measures will, but they will be dealt with, I presume, in the committee as well. The really onerous ones, I think that they wanted to have introduced in the Senate, thinking that they would be killed before the House had to vote on them. That's a strategy that's not often well publicized, but where you have a bill introduced is sometimes just as important to the fate of the legislation as what the bill is. Because if it's killed in one side, it doesn't see the light of day, and if there's a companion version in the House, it means it will meet a similar fate in the Senate that will be killed.
Okay, and you used to be able to rely on that pretty well in the Senate because the Democrats controlled the committees, but now they don't.
That's right. It's 50-50, and unless you get down to 2020, unless you get down to a budget decision or a constitutional amendment, there's a tiebreaker. Although I would say, given this session, Lieutenant Governor Bowling isn't a sure vote for anybody.
He seems to have found a voice.
He seems to have found a voice and a remarkable degree of independence. So we'll see what happens. But
which is kind of, as I've been reading about it, because I don't know him, is inconsistent. I read this report that said, he and Ken Cuccinelli met, and they didn't have that different a voting record when they were both in the legislature. But now, Lieutenant Governor Bowling seems to be trying to position himself as that moderate voice and his independent run that I guess he'll make a decision of in another month or so what he's going to do.
I think so. He's getting a lot of encouragement from the business community to run, because I think the business community realizes that Attorney General Cuccinelli, and he's still Attorney General, he doesn't seem to have any inclination to forego his position while he runs for governor, is perceived as too extreme because of the nature of his legislation and the nature of his regulations, his rulings, overruling the decision about grandfathering in the clinics that provide abortions and giving them a sort of a grandfather provision from all the additional constraints and regulations that the House and Senate originally put on. I think that his doing that made the business community realize that he is going to be a very extremist, too scary for a lot of voters in Virginia, even people who are normally committed Republicans. And so they're looking to perhaps Lieutenant Governor Bowling to sort of fill in the pro-business, more moderate, at least a more moderate face on the electorate. It should be very exciting to watch.
It will be very interesting to see what happens with all of that. But let me ask you about these abortion clinic regulations, the TARP regulations, because you mentioned Attorney General Cuccinelli, and basically he threatened the Board of Health.
Yes.
Last fall, saying if you grandfather these clinics and there is a legal challenge to you grandfathering them, which as I understand it is the standard practice, that his office, which was charged with defending them, wouldn't do it, and they would have to pay for their own lawyers to defend themselves. And so they capitulated. I don't know if she was the chair of the board, but one of the members of the board, one of the doctors, resigned.
Yes.
Resigned, saying, I can't function like this. We're not acting for the best interest, the health issues. They make an argument, people like Cuccinelli make the argument that the TARP regulations are necessary for safety.
They're not necessary for safety any more than having clinics for certain kinds of dentistry or other outpatient surgery are necessary for safety. This is purely to provide constraints and impediments to women seeking their own constitutional choice and making their own healthcare decisions. And to put surgical hospital requirements on these clinics, in fact, is to try to shut them down, most of them down, make them non-economically viable for really poor women and people who don't have access to clinics otherwise. So it was really to throw up roadblocks unnecessarily, and they have nothing to do with women's health. It's a social engineering kind of issue. So, and when the governor had a chance to not sign it, he very quietly did sign the regulations into law on Friday, December 28th, between Christmas and New Year's, in the hope that no one would notice.
No one would
but
notice.
We did notice, and there is a public comment period now, Bettina, where people can either send their comments online or in March show up in person and tell the governor and tell the attorney general just what they think about these onerous regulations for women.
Now, where can they go? Because we've got about 30 seconds.
All right.
Where can they go if they want to participate in that process?
Coalitionforwomenshealth.org, coalitionforwomenshealth.org is where you can sign up to make your comments online. And on March 12th at the John Marshall Library in Alexandria at 1 p.m., you can show up and speak in person about it.
Excellent. Well, we want to encourage folks to do that because those are fairly controversial regulations.
Absolutely.
And we need to have people's voices heard. Frankly, I'm skeptical that anybody will hear them, but we need to say it anyway.
We're going to mobilize them.
We're going to mobilize them. So, Margi, thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Stay with us. We'll be back.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ring-top money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People! The flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Yeah, look a little over my shoulder. Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I am the host of Inside Scoop Virginia, and we are continuing with our General Assembly update. And we are turning to elder issues. And we have with us, this is their encore appearance. They did such a fabulous job when they were here last year. We have with us David Broder. He is the president of the SEIU Virginia 512, and he is with the Northern Virginia Aging Network. And we also have with us Cherie Lejeune. She is the founder of High Performance Aging. You can check that out on Facebook. She is also with the Northern Virginia Aging Network and served on their 2013 Vulnerable Adults Financial Exploitation Legislation Committee. And despite its incredibly long name, it has some incredibly important work that it has done. So we're going to talk about the issues that are down at the General Assembly. Where do they stand? Are they making it through the crossover to continue to be considered, or are they amongst the things that the General Assembly has decided they're not going to deal with? So welcome back. I appreciate both of you taking time to come and talk with us about these things.
Thanks for inviting us back.
So one of the issues that I heard you were interested in is something called community and home-based services. And it has something to do with, or it involves in some fashion, Medicaid waivers, which sometimes I think I know what they are and sometimes I don't. So, assuming that our viewers have no clue, David, can you explain that to us? What's a Medicaid waiver, and then what's the issue with the community and home-based services?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Bettina. So a Medicaid waiver simply allows an older adult or a person with a disability to access long-term care services at home instead of a nursing home. And we know that older adults want to be in their homes as they age. They want the same things that any of us want.
Well, and it's much cheaper, too, isn't it, to take care of somebody at their home?
And that's where home and community-based services are really a win-win. It's where older adults want to be. It provides quality care, and it actually saves the state money, as you point out. It saves $43,000 per person per year as opposed to nursing home care.
Okay, and so what's the issue? What are you guys looking at, the Northern Virginia Aging Network?
Sure, so Virginia, I think with its rapidly aging population, has a real choice in front of us. Either we're going to invest in home and community-based services, as we just shared, or we're going to keep throwing money into costly and unnecessary hospitalization and nursing homes. And so yesterday, the state budget committees released their budgets, and we got some of their answers about those choices. There's some good news, and there's actually a lot to be concerned about. First and foremost, both the House and the Senate budget committees announced that they were going to be restoring home care for 3,000 older adults and people with disabilities who would have lost those services in 2014. So that's a really important first step.
3,000 doesn't sound like a lot of old people or disabled people, though. How many people are left without any kind of help, though?
That's a great point. There's thousands on the waiting list right now, and thousands more that we don't even know about, because with such a long waiting list, they rightfully ask, what's the point about getting on? But restoring that home care was an important first step. Where we're most concerned, though, is that the legislature yesterday did nothing to address how do we build a quality home care workforce that's going to care for our older adults and our loved ones.
Well, and what are they doing about that? Because I go around in my real life, as we say, in my business life, and I meet a lot of people at different, Chamber of Commerce kinds of events who tell me they're now running a home health care company. And I always say to them, where do you find your people, and how do you train them, and what do you pay them? And there seems to be a huge disparity, and a lot of folks who, apparently Africa is a great source of places for some of these folks. So how does this all play when you say they haven't really done anything about the workers themselves? What do you want done? What do you think needs to be done?
So, and home care is one of those few parts of our economy that's really growing and helping us get out of this economic crisis. Unfortunately, Medicaid home care providers in Northern Virginia make $11.47 an hour, and they have no health care benefits. They don't even have a single paid sick day, let alone a retirement. So those folks who are pouring your coffee at Starbucks or flipping your burgers at McDonald's actually are getting better pay and better benefits than those people who are providing the most important care for the people we love. And that, of course, means that older adults and their families have a really hard time recruiting and retaining the quality caregivers that they need. So what we were hoping that the legislature did, and which the state budget committees did not do yesterday, would be to increase the pay rate, because $11.47 an hour is nowhere near a living wage in this area, and take a first step towards providing paid sick days or some kind of benefit. And that they didn't is really concerning. Ultimately, it's older adults and their families that are going to be hurt by this.
So is this simply this philosophy that says the government should stay out of these kinds of things, or is this a broader policy issue? I tend to think that the budget really reflects what your values are and what you really want to encourage in society. So what do you think that all means?
I think it's a really short-sighted approach to the looming home care crisis that we face. It is easier to just keep going with the status quo, to keep pumping money into nursing homes and pretending that we're going to be fine. But the truth is, we've got some decisions to make about what kind of state do we want to be. And the good news is that by investing in home and community-based services, not only can we provide better care, but we can also help cut the costs in terms of our Medicaid budget. And so we are hoping that as legislators look at the budget and as it moves forward, that they'll make the right decisions and have a little bit of a braver approach moving forward.
And is there, and I guess this isn't a budget thing, but is there standardized training that's required so that you could say the elderly people would have some assurance that regardless of where they found the person, that there was some commonality of training or something?
You know, that's another good point, and there's not nearly enough training available, and so folks aren't getting the training they need, and there's no career ladder. We know that we would recruit more folks to be home care providers if there was a career ladder that was clear to them, that they could move up the rankings and become nurses and become other positions in the healthcare field. And so I think we really need to invest in our home care system. And as our population ages, as the baby boomers retire, this is going to be a really pressing issue.
Yeah, it is. I hear about it all the time. It is not great. Well, we're sort of going from what I think some people would consider to be exploitation of the home care workers with the underpayment and the no any kind of benefits type of thing, to what you know about a lot, Cherie, which is the financial exploitation issues of the elderly. So what was the Northern Virginia Aging Network concerned about with respect to financial exploitation? What are they trying to get through the legislature?
Well, it's been an issue that NVAN, for example, has had on the table for years. It's something that we keep coming back to over and over again. In fact, it's growing. And throughout the country, state legislators everywhere are grappling with this because MetLife, for example, did a survey and $2.9 billion were lost through monetary, financial, which was called mature financial abuse of seniors. In Virginia, what was examined was police reports, because they wanted to see how it grew. So from 2010 to 2011, they saw there were 1,952 incidences where people were 60 years of age or older. So that's telling you that that age category is being impacted, and all of them were for crimes $200 and above. So the language, we were lucky to have two Northern Virginia delegate representatives support bills, Eileen Filler-Korn and Vivian Watts. Okay. But the two bills that are still standing and will have their chance in the crossover is House Bill 1682, Robert Bell, and Senate Bill 706 by Stewart. And they have the same language, and I want to make sure that I say this correctly, because if not, it's very clear, because people will say, oh, that's not, the incapacitated doesn't mean what I think. So quickly, the legislation proposes to make it unlawful and punishable as larceny if someone knowing of another's mental incapacity takes advantage of that mental incapacity to take or convert the incapacitated person's money or other property to its own use. Now, the mental incapacity is defined as a condition at the time of the offense.
Okay.
Because maybe someone's been hospitalized and comes out and is medicated and may have an issue. And they may be taken advantage of. So it's at the time of the offense.
Okay.
Secondly, which is important, and the second thing is about good faith. Because people are assisting people who may have dementia or Alzheimer's. We can't punish them for trying to be helpful, because sometimes that happens too, and that's not to punish family members who are helping. So it's a fine line. The fiscal impact statement was they're not sure, because larceny, the framework for the sentencing is from 1 to 20 years. And they're saying, so what would be the fiscal impact? The fiscal impact they're couching as $50,000, which means if you incarcerate more people with this tag, it's going to cost them more. So the real issues are here, training the police better to identify this, training the public to be more aware of this. And the next thing is obviously is just be able to define what is exploitation in general, because we in the community are always the best servants of getting this kind of news out. If we took more responsibility in our communities, I think we would help impact and lessen this particular crime. But it's good to have it on the books.
Right.
Anyhow, because then it sends the right message. So that's that.
Well, and I do have to wonder, you've cited some statistics, how underreported financial exploitation is of the elderly, because so much of it is with people who they're trying to help, or their family members and they're trying to help. And as you say, you don't want to penalize them, but on the other hand, some of this gets pretty egregious. And so having something on the book that says, this is serious, and sort of that message you're saying to the community is something that's serious. So this will make it through crossover. That bill is still alive. So people interested in that need to get a hold of their delegates and their senators to say, this is an issue, I take it seriously, and you need to vote for this.
And this is the furthest it's ever gotten, so we're very hopeful. It would be great if they actually passed this year.
All right, well, that's our message to folks, and we are running out of time, so I want to thank you both for coming, and hopefully the financial exploitation bill will pass so that our seniors can get some protection and our police can get some process to deal with that whole thing. So, Cherie, Lejeune with high performance aging. I am going to look you up on Facebook. It sounds like a great idea, a little high performance aging here. David, Broder, I want to thank you both so much for taking your time tonight to come and talk with us about this. And we'll look to see what happens in the rest of the General Assembly with the issues.
Great,
so,
thank you for having us.
Having us.
All right. So we're just going to sort of wait and chat as, you know, Oprah.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, the host of Inside Scoop Virginia, and we are joined for this segment by Steve Greenburg, who is the president of the Fairfax Federation of Teachers. This is Steve's second appearance. He was on our labor show a little bit ago, and so we're here today to talk specifically about education, what's going on down in the General Assembly. So Steve, thanks so much for coming back. I know you're going crazy with everything that you have to be doing, both down in Richmond and up here in Fairfax.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to talk to you about a bunch of stuff, but first I want to talk to you about what I have heard called the governor's education plan. And most folks have heard of the governor's transportation plan. Senator Northam spoke about it in our first area segment. And, you know, you can run through that and say, oh, it's the get rid of the gas tax. It's, you know, tax, fees put on hybrid cars. I couldn't actually tell you what's in the governor's education plan. So can you give us a sense of, are there certain key components of it, and what are we going to do with where it all stands?
The governor's education plan is multifaceted. There are 3 main areas, but there could be 4, depending on how you look at it. One has to do with teachers and some things around teachers and teacher contracts and some pay with teachers. There's an innovation and accountability piece. There's a piece that has to do with school choice. And then some people would also suggest that the safety and security measures that are going through the General Assembly are also part of the governor's broader range education plan.
Well, let's talk with the back one, because that sounded like guns to me. And that's such a big issue for so many people. And I saw that your organization and maybe some others did a survey of teachers, because you heard a whole bunch of, parents talking and politicians, of course, talking ad nauseum about it, but the teacher voice hadn't been represented. And 59% of the teachers who were asked about it said they didn't want guns in the school. 5% said yes, and the people in the middle said, well, it kind of depends. So where does it all fall out? There was legislation on that. Has that survived? Is it going forward? What's the mix on that issue?
One of the interesting things is, even though 59% said they did not want guns in schools, when asked what they would support, 65% said they would support professional police officers with weapons in schools. So, and how that translates into the General Assembly, Delegate Marshall had a bill up to arm teachers with weapons, and that's not going to be successful. However, there is $30 million that the governor's task force just put into monies for SROs, school resource officers, which are basically, in this case, Fairfax County Police that work in liaison with the school system. But that money can also be earmarked for safety and security assistance, which are part of my membership.
Okay, so does your membership include the police officers, the student resource?
No, the police officers are AFL-CIO. They're part of our brothers and sisters in labor more generally, but the safety and security officers who are not actually armed, those assistants are part of our membership within the teachers union.
And is there a theory of arming those kinds of people? Those are the ones who sort of make you go to class on time?
No, back to the survey, Bettina, our membership by majority supports trained professionals. And in this case, we're talking about the SROs. The SROs function not just for security, they're there for the multitude of things that police officers can offer, community policing, they help with curriculum, DARE programs, traffic, safety. So I think that's one of the added benefits beyond the security of having the police officers there versus, say, an armed guard or some other type of a person with a gun.
So in Fairfax, as I understand it, there are these resource officers, police officers in all of the high schools, but they aren't in the middle schools or the elementary. So is that the idea that you'd expand the program to include all the schools instead?
Actually, they're in a lot of the middle schools too.
Or they are,
but you're absolutely correct. The idea is that perhaps we need to have a police officer at all levels. We want to protect all of our children. We want to make sure that we're in all the locations where they would be relevant and important. And looking at some of the recent events across the country, we can see that all of our children need to be safe, and it doesn't seem to be isolated to one particular level of building.
And the $30 million, that would be for the entire state. Are these resource officers common outside of Northern Virginia? Are they already existing in the rural schools, do you know?
I don't know. I think there's a variance across the state. I think the other piece of this legislation is going to have to do with the local match for the school systems. Our local school board, for example, in their legislative positions that they took earlier this month, said that they're all for SROs, but they don't want to have the state mandate that they have to hire a certain number of them if there's also a local match on funding, because as you know, our school system is really having some budget constraints right now.
So does that $30 million, does it have that requirement that you match if you take any of that money?
My understanding is there are some provisions with that legislation, so we'll have to see what our local school board chooses to do and what some of the provisions of that are in relation to what we can do in Fairfax County.
Okay, and are there any specific limitations existing in Fairfax County now? I read something that said, maybe we could arm principals or something, which I thought was a terrible idea, but I didn't know if there were any restrictions already.
Well, at this time, the policies and regulations are such that the only people that can carry weapons on Fairfax County property are Fairfax County Police. Okay. And once again, they have it's the juvenile division, which has a commander staff liaison that is then coordinates with the Fairfax County Public Schools public safety person. So they are hired, they are paid by Fairfax County Police, but they work in conjunction with the school system and safety and security office.
Okay, well let's go back to the rest of the governor's program. On the teachers, what I remember reading about was something that said, we'll give you a raise of like 2%, but you've got to give up certain rights or you had to be evaluated more often or something like that. What was that whole thing about?
There's a lot of contingencies. First of all, there's a local match on the 2% that the governor is recommending for teachers, whereby the local school system has to pick up the additional money on that. Now, in Fairfax County Public Schools, one of the concerns is that it is only instructional staff that the governor is looking to pay for with that 2%. And Fairfax County obviously has a multitude of employees that work with our kids, but they're not considered under state standards instructional staff. So in essence, the original projection from the Fairfax County School Board was it would cost them about $30 million to gain an additional $5 million from the state in order to put that raise in. So once again, we'll see, if it passes on both sides, we'll see how that ends up affecting the FCPS budget.
Wow, that's a lot of money given the size of the FCPS budget already. To add $30 million is a lot.
Now, there are some other variables that go along with that. In order for the governor to provide that money, there are some things that have to change in the contracts of teachers or how we deal with them. One of them is to take the probationary period. Teachers in this state right now go through 3 annual evaluations. You have to make it successfully through the first 3 years, and then you're still evaluated the next 2 years, but you don't have to go through all the paperwork. You can focus a little bit more on the classroom. The governor wants to give the local school boards the option to raise that to 5 years. One of the big pieces we're concerned about is due process. Right now, if a teacher is put in a probationary period after they have performed well for, say, 3 years, and let's say they go for another 2 and they start to slip a little bit, right now you go into a probationary period where if at the end you grieve the final decision that you're going to be terminated as a teacher, there is a panel which has a representative from the employee, from the school system, and then there's an arbitrator that sits on that panel that's selected by both parties, and then you go through a hearing. What the governor is proposing to do is to get rid of the hearing panel and simply put a hearing officer in. And one of the great concerns is that the hearing officer would be selected by the school board. So in essence, the employer is controlling the hearing officer. So the idea of streamlining the grievance process so that you can work these things through more quickly and more cost effectively, I think that's something that both sides could agree to. But to have the person who's hearing the case be simply selected by management is not typical of most labor management types of agreements. So that's one of our main concerns.
Yeah, that does not sound like a rational way to go about it, to say let's get rid of the independent person who's currently in the process and just have one side and say we'll call that a day and it'll be fair. That does not strike me as really great. Well, let's ask about a couple of other things, because there was an article this morning in the Washington Post about what they're calling the Tim Tebow bill. Is that part of the governor's plan in one of your categories where, and that's about letting homeschool kids play sports, I guess high school sports is what they're specifically talking about.
Yeah, House Bill 1442, I believe that is something that the governor does support. That has passed the House, and what that relates to is children who are homeschooled being able to play with the public school athletic teams. I don't know if we necessarily have any particular position with it. I can tell you that some of the concerns are that the qualifiers, if you're homeschooling your child, may be different for them to be able to play those sports than the kids that are going to the public school. And I think that's one of the concerns from the public school standpoint. I think from the homeschooling parents, their position is that they pay taxes, which go into the athletic programs, and so they feel like their children should have the opportunity to use them.
Well, it is a difficult thing to measure, though, because when you want to play high school sports, you have to maintain a certain grade and you've got attendance requirements and there's stuff you have to do. I don't know how homeschoolers could meet the same criteria because it's your mom teaching you or your dad or somebody, and that seems to have less of a standard approach to it. So it's tough.
The requirements are a little bit different. I think there also could be some consideration for the flexibility in the schedule of the homeschool students. Perhaps they have an advantage to be able to practice more when it comes to athletics. But what it ultimately comes down to when it comes to our position, the school board's positions, it's very similar to what's going on with Teach for America, which is also in the second phase of the governor's education plan, which has to do with innovation. They want to allow Teach for America candidates who come in on a provisional license, which is not the same criteria that another person coming into the state and wants to teach. That's not what they have to have in order to get into the classroom. The issue becomes one of equity. In other words, what you're going to require a classroom teacher to have as a prerequisite criteria qualifications, that should be commensurate with what you would allow somebody from Teach for America. So looking back at the Tim Tebow bill, I think that what parents want to make sure in the public schools is that the same types of the same bar that their kid has to jump over in order to qualify to play sports, that those are the same qualifiers that the parent with the homeschooling would have to have for their child.
And similarly, as you say, with the Teach for America, that those teachers are qualified to the same degree as a different teacher, because if my kid's in a classroom with a Teach for America, I don't want to feel like they're not getting the same quality of instruction as somebody else who didn't come through that program.
The Fairfax County School Board, when addressing this, came ultimately to the decision that we don't want to discourage any high quality applicants from teaching in the state. You don't want to discourage Teach from America from getting quality young educators here, but we do want to be very careful that we're using the same criteria, that we're keeping the quality of instruction. So what they have said is that they would personally not be interested in hiring any Teach from America for America candidates until they were sure that the licensure that they had and the qualifiers were the same.
Okay, well, that seems like a reasonable kind of position to take. Well, we can hear the music, which means that we are about out of time. There's a lot there, so we encourage people to go to your website, take a look at it, get in touch with their delegates, and stay tuned on the education issues. I want to thank you, Steve Greenburg, for coming and joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Great.